With the arrest warrant, the International Criminal Court arrest warrant for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant being up there for a few days, many nations, especially the ones that are obviously signatories to the Rome Statute that sort of underlies the International Criminal Court, many of them have made their stance about what they would do because they have an obligation according to the Rome Statute, basically arrest Netanyahu as a war criminal if he ever comes to their country. So many countries have already committed to this. We might talk about them. Many have, one has, or few have committed against that, basically saying they will not abide by this. And many of them, as the title suggests, Prime Minister of United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, is very split on the issue. So we'll talk about this split. And since we are talking about the international law, I'm here to represent that. James is here as just an eye candy because international law doesn't require a lawyer. So there is no reason for him to be here as one. He's just here to, provide some beauty.
Eye candy. That's that's how I'm typically described as eye candy. Yeah.
So
but you're
yeah,
right.
so we've already made few episodes about the International Criminal Court and this arrest warrant, where we've covered many of the facts, you could call them. So we'll be talking a bit more about the reaction, but James hasn't been on to talk about this specifically. So James, do you have just some sort of introductory statements to say about this?
If there is a crime against humanity here, if that concept has any meaning, it's the arrest warrant for Netanyahu that is the international war crime. And anyone who supports this arrest warrant for the prime minister of Israel, who's engaged in the most surgical, precise, over precise, over gingerly, over concerned about so-called innocent civilian casualties. If that is a war crime, if that is worthy of an arrest warrant, then any prime minister, any government that would support that owes us a specific, detailed explanation as to what they would have done in the wake of October 7th differently than Mr. Netanyahu. Now, obviously, given what Mr. Netanyahu did and did not do over the last year plus, that would be a very interesting discussion, wouldn't it? But I would demand of the British Prime Minister to tell us what he would have done differently. What he would have done differently. And if he can't give that, I mean, obviously the only real alternative that he would have accepted and not been critical of is Israel surrendering and just saying, okay, well, here's a bunch of Palestinian terrorists that we're going to release and hope that you guys release the hostages. What was that, Mr. Prime Minister, your alternative? Mr. Prime Minister, what is your alternative? Oh, and when the Hezbollah missiles came in from the north, what's your alternative to that? Lay down and die? Have tens of thousands of people displaced from northern Israel and make that permanent? Let them kill children on football fields? What's the alternative? When Iran attacks, oh, so wait a minute here. So Iran was justified in its barrage, its 2 missile barrages? What is the alternative, Mr. Prime Minister, that you would have? And I want it specific. I want you to tell me how it is you would have destroyed Hamas. Oh, not destroyed Hamas? What would you have done? Would you have killed anybody? Would you have tried to get the hostages back? Would you have responded in force at all? Does Israel have a right to defend itself? An arrest warrant against the Prime Minister of Israel at this point is anti-Semitic inherently. It is anti-Israel inherently. What it's saying is Israel has no right to defend itself. Whatever contradictions come out of a Prime Minister's mouth, oh, well, they have a right to self-defense. Only anything they do is a war crime. Anything Israel does is a war crime. I want a specific alternative, and I want it spelled out. The other thing that I'd say is, why should Israel respect any diplomatic immunity of any of these countries that would go along with this? They are spitting in Israel's face. They're saying Israel really ultimately has no right to exist, and that in this context, Israeli government leaders have no right to be in our country. I would, if I was Israel, I would kick out the British diplomatic corps from wherever they are. Jerusalem, probably not. Tel Aviv, I would kick out British diplomats. They've lost all right to have any conversation with Israel. They owe the world the British Prime Minister owes the world a detailed explanation of what he would have done differently than Mr. Netanyahu. And I want the specifics, and I want him to tell us how that would have made a difference, how that would have responded to October 7th. Until and unless that happens, any respect for this arrest warrant is absolutely a vicious, anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, racist position. A position that says Israel has no right to defend itself, whatever verbiage comes out of anyone's mouth.
So we'll talk. We'll go to the what sort of the prime minister, or rather prime minister spokesperson have said. Someone is saying no arrest warrants for any Houthi, Taliban, or living Gazan leaders. Well, just quickly. Living is a. But Mohammed Deif is one of the people that also has a arrest warrant on him, and if Ismail Haniyeh and Sinwar were still alive, I believe they were discussing that also they would have arrest warrants. The sort of like I don't know, maybe what would be even the right word for this, but basically the reason why they technically cannot do arrest warrants, for example, the Houthis, is they can only put arrest warrants on the sort of jurisdiction where they have, meaning you have to be signatory to the ICC or to the Roman statute to be able to be prosecuted. So, for example, if you say Iranian leaders or Taliban, for example, well, they are not signatories, so they cannot be called. And the only reason why they could have it with Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant is that the Palestinian territories are signatories to the Roman statute, while Israel isn't. And because these war crimes have supposedly happened in Gaza, which while not under control of the Palestinian Authority, is technically part of the Palestinian territories, which are the signatories. This way you can have it on Netanyahu. This international law is kind of fun. It's almost like you can only punish good guys through those mechanisms.
It is injustice, inherent. It's institutionalized injustice. Unless you can provide equal justice under the law, unless you can provide law in an equal, non-discriminatory way, it cannot be justice, can it? So it's the International Court of Injustice by its very nature. They cannot issue justice. It is impossible for that body to be an agent of justice because it cannot internationally, with equality, with indifference to the parties, which is what law requires. If it is biased and partisan in that way, if it can only be enforced against certain people but not against other people, then it is injustice. Injustice on the face of it. Now, of course, it's an injustice deeper than that as well. I mean, that's almost a procedural way of looking at the injustice here. But here is that they have the absolute wrong idea about war and self-defense. And so the actual judgment itself is based on a corrupt view of morality. And so, of course, it is in that deeper sense, it's injustice, inherently injustice in itself. Now, the good news of all this is that this discredits the ICC. I hope that Mr. Trump will come in and denounce the ICC, invite Mr. Netanyahu especially, roll out the red carpet for him so that the ICC gets all of the anti-sanction, the negative sanction that it deserves so richly. People should ridicule this evil decision. People should realize that this is an anti-Semitic, racist organization committed to the destruction of Israel, in effect, by implication. We'll only go after Netanyahu, but we will arrest Netanyahu should he show up in the United Kingdom. Well, the United Kingdom, you are signatories to an anti-Israel, anti-Semitic procedure. The organization, the ICC, the treaty, the Rome Treaty that you're complying with is itself injustice. And what it has is the veneer of justice because it's talking in these big, highfalutin abstractions like crimes against humanity. War is war. It will involve death. It will involve killing people. It will involve starving people to death. if necessary. Warfare has involved intentional starvation since the dawn of civilization, sieges of cities, walls, and towers. Until the 20th century, fixed fortifications were, and sieging fixed fortifications, a siege of a city. That is to say, the starvation, the intentional starvation was part of the strategy. Because on the face of it, feeding your enemy is doing the very opposite of killing them. I mean, on the face of it, rewarding your enemy and killing them is in itself a giant contradiction. Contradiction is the theme here, isn't it?
Yeah, so I definitely want to go to that just quickly because you mentioned Donald Trump. So yeah, as far as I understand, he hasn't specifically commented, but the Senate Majority Leader designate, that's the official term, I guess, Republican John, how do you pronounce it? Thune?
Boon.
Thune.
We have it's not
Yeah,
too boon. Yes.
he has talked about it. He basically supported or has said he would sanction or he would support sanctioning the ICC, which would definitely be the bare minimum, I think. When it comes to this, then we can kick out the UN just right after
Oh,
that.
but that is good that the new incoming Senate Majority Leader is saying that ICC should be sanctioned. That's the beginning of what I'm talking about. ICC should get the justice it deserves, the punishment it deserves for doing such gross injustice, for being such a racist, vile organization as the ICC. It should be regarded with moral contempt by anyone with any true sense of moral principles. And that means sanctioning it. That means countries going out of the way to say it's wrong, it's immoral, we do not recognize it, get the hell out of our country, and let's invite Mr. Netanyahu and roll out the red carpet. Thank you. Yes.
So so just going to Stammer specifically, as I've said, some nations have committed, but UK is very much flip-flopping on it. So as soon as the arrest warrant came out, I think what we've heard is there is no Israel has a right to defend itself in accordance with international law. There is no equivalence between Israel, a democracy, and Hamas and Lebanese Hezbollah, which are terrorist organizations. Then after that, when they were asked if they would arrest Netanyahu if he showed up in the UK, the spokesman said, we are not going to get into hypotheticals, like the actual case that's like right before you. And then I think the day after that or a bit later, they have said the UK will always comply with its legal obligation as set out by domestic law and indeed international law. So again, pointing towards basically that they would abide by this warrant, would arrest Netanyahu while not saying it out specifically. And I think, as you mentioned, contradiction being the theme of today, I think it is because many of these, so just to name few that are sort of like wrestling with it, Germany, France, and UK are among the biggest ones that are haven't made statement either way. And the basic argument sort of being, that's our ally. Israel is our ally, even though we don't always show it. It's it's I think someone once said it. This is the first time basically that democratically elected leader has, in an actual like Western democracy, has been put out arrest warrant on him. So it is a different situation, and they're wrestling with basically, in international law is the holiest invention possible. So you cannot, you don't want to go against that, but you don't really want to, because once you commit to that, you are basically saying Netanyahu and Gallant, and you have to think about the future, about the precedents. Basically, if the ICC just goes after any democratic nation that is actively trying to fight. I mean, many of these nations were involved during the Iraq War, for example, and during many of the other wars. And what would all of the I'm not sure if the ICC goes retroactively, but if something like Iraq would happen, when you had this sort of international coalition, are all the Western leaders now war criminals? Because pretty much, I mean, if you consider war crime what's happening in Gaza, then any military conflict from now on is automatically a war crime. There is what Israel is doing, as you've said, is the most precise, and I think I don't consider that a good thing, but it is like the most precise, most safe way of actually like engaging in a war that we've ever seen.
Where's the arrest warrant for Mr. Xi? Where's the arrest warrant for Mr. Putin? Where's the arrest warrant for the IS?
Well, Putin has it, and again, as I've said, China is not signatory, so they don't have it.
And will Western, I understand Germany is wrestling with it because, well, we've got our Nazi past, so we won't necessarily enforce this. And Christian nationalists like Orban and Hungary, okay, I understand that they're the ones who can sort of stand out. There is a mixed group of reactions, but where are we having the British government? What would you do if Putin was invited? What would you do if Putin just came to town? Would you arrest him? And would you make that clear? And is that really a moral issue? See, the moral confusion here is ghastly. It's not the dictator. See, in dictatorship is the cause of war. It is the theocratic dictators in Iran, the dictators in Moscow, the dictators in Beijing. They are the ones who cause war. It is not countries like Israel, or by the way, Great Britain or the United States, that actually cause wars. They have an interest in peace. But my British friends, you guys have been so totally morally confused on this. Back before the Labour government took power, the Tories were offering as a carrot the recognition of a Palestinian state in the wake of October 7th, a total reward, calling for more negotiations, ceasefires, all that crap. Perpetual war, in effect. Altruism cannot win wars. Turning the other cheek cannot win wars. The morality of altruism, my American and British friends, cannot win wars. They only encourage, foster, reward, and positively sanction evil. That is all they can do. And so your positive sanctioning of evil, as in this case, the potential enforcement of an arrest warrant against Mr. Netanyahu, is getting it totally morally inverted. You're now in the perverse situation of saying that the person who lifts a finger to defend himself is the bad guy. And lifts a finger, I'm talking about. Consider too, Mr. Gallant. Oh, yeah, you know what a bloodthirsty hawk he was. And this is insane. This is perverse. Not only is Mr. Netanyahu too gingerly in his response, the idea of Mr. Gallant, it makes it kind of a joke, doesn't it? So nothing Israel could have done would have satisfied international opinion on this. No, international opinion on this is both mired in altruism and says any violent response, even to violent aggression, is immoral. No, it is moral. Everything that makes aggression wrong makes the use of force and self-defense moral, right, and heroic. Everything that makes October 7 wrong would make a destruction of Hamas right. And so with that kind of moral confusion, you guys are just sanctioning the Hitlers, sanctioning the enemies. I mean, was Churchill a war criminal because of Dresden? Many times more over than Mr. Netanyahu. Many times over. Churchill was a monster compared to Netanyahu using the standard you're using today, Great Britain. That is how morally perverse your philosophy is. My country in America, we're not really much better, are we? No, what we do is we sanction evil. We foster and reward, protect, feed, literally feed evil in this case. And that's called morality. This perpetual, endless war in the Middle East, that's called morality. No, that is utterly perverse. That's what's evil. The ICC is evil. This arrest warrant is what's evil. Your acknowledgement of it as legitimate, Great Britain, is what's evil.
Yeah, and just to talk about, because you mentioned Putin, and there is technically an arrest warrant on Putin because Ukraine and Russia. I'm not sure when Russia pulled out completely out of the Roman statute, but Ukraine, I believe, still is. So that's why you can have an arrest warrant on Putin. And people, when it happened, people were very quick to jump on it. Yeah, there should be an arrest warrant, and many have committed that they would pretty much arrest him if he were to show up in any of those countries. But something that I think. So, James, I don't know about you, but I've been recently looking into Russian disinformation and sort of how it works, how the Russian hybrid warfare works. And the idea is basically you don't fight it by trying to discredit the truth. You just put out so much misinformation that for people that it will make it impossible for people to distinguish between reality and like fake. I don't like the word fake news, but misinformation that you basically you just give up and you say the truth is not possible. It's not possible. There's just so much stuff I cannot find reality. And when it comes to, again, because if you look at the list of the ICC arrest warrants or the people who were actually arrested, those are terrible people, as you mentioned, Putin, Gaddafi. If you go many African like warlords, like really bad people.
Really
But
bad people.
but similar to this hybrid warfare, what happens when you start? I mean, there was even if you go a few decades back, there was the idea that George W. Bush was a war criminal. Some people still like say it, and a potential arrest warrant for him. Now there is an actual arrest warrant for Netanyahu. What happens when people like those that I'd say are not? What happens to people looking at it? If they say, well, if Netanyahu is a war criminal, I thought Putin was a war criminal, but maybe it just doesn't mean anything. Again, I think it has a similar feature. These people are actively like destroying the idea that, yeah, there can be sort of like evil people or really improper. I mean, even starting war when it comes to Russia, Ukraine was already like a problem. But that it is a way to basically, I think, like have like a genocidal intent, even in war. And when you start grouping all of these people together, you completely the idea of war criminal completely starts losing any meaning. Again, and that's why United Nations are and specifically ICC is so problematic. They are destroying the faculty of actually being able to analyze like different politicians and different sort of conflicts by basically saying it's all bad.
That there is a truth is an epistemological assertion that the West is no longer willing to assert. Who could know? It's always ambiguous. And two, of course, then any force used, any force is wrong. So if you use force in self-defense, that's evil. That's an intrinsicist view of force. But that's the kind of altruism, insofar as there is a truth, it's altruism. It's actually altruism. And so anything that's done now, it's except Israel is a special exception. What's interesting is that people will recognize Ukraine's right to defend itself from Russia. Well, that's you see, that's obvious. That's a no-brainer. Why? Why is it so much a no-brainer in that case, but not in this case? Well, that goes back to epistemology, and that's got to go back to things like racism, simple racism. Israel is in a sense a far superior government than Ukraine, not an inferior one. And yet everyone recognizes they were the invaded party. No, invasion is a war crime. Starting the war is a war crime. What do you mean crime? In the sense that a crime requires a response of physical force. When someone initiates physical force, they've committed, in effect, a crime by violating someone's rights in initiating force. And therefore, the use of force against them in response, in rational response, is perfectly just. It is the moral thing to do, not turn the other cheek and be pacifistic. So when you say, what's a war crime? Well, starting the damn war. The invading party, Hitler, when he invades Poland or the Sudetenland, Hitler is the starter of the war. Putin was the starter of the war in Ukraine. Hamas was the starter of the war over the last year plus. The aggressor is wrong, and that means force against the aggressor is good. And we have to say that. It is good to kill the aggressors. It is good to stop the aggression. Quite the opposite. See how we've turned it all upside down perversely. And yeah, that does require epistemological corruption, enough people to doubt that the truth is accessible at all, but also to accept the correct moral response, not to be an intrinsicist about the use of force. And that's what this is. It's total intrinsicism. Winston Churchill was much worse of a war criminal than Netanyahu, using their current standards. Full stop. Winston Churchill is British people. Face it. What you'd be saying if you arrest Mr. Netanyahu is that the great political hero of the 20th century, Winston Churchill, was much worse and really no different than Adolf Hitler. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, if you consider something like the bombing of Dresden, which was it was targeting civilians. It was it was targeting the military structures, or something like the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I mean, that one is even more clear. That there is nothing else but indiscriminate, like a bombing, complete annihilation of basically two cities, two populations. And I think many people, and I mean, there was I think, discussion about that. The sort of those bombings were wrong, I think, has been sort of the idea for a few decades now, if not longer. And yeah, I think many of those people would consider people like I guess it was Truman, right? It wasn't FDR anymore, who actually approved those. But they would consider them war criminals. And again, those two acts, bombing of Dresden and bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, not to mention, I mean, people always bring up, but there were many more cities bombed, both in Japan and Germany, not just those three. I mean, the firebombing of Japan, but those actually allowed to finish the war. If I mean, just imagine if there was the same standard. I mean, big reason why Japan has surrendered is because those people were starving. They were like actively starving, because there was an active campaign, like a bombing campaign, or I think like a submarine campaign of basically destroying any convoys going into Japan. Imagine if you had to, and there was some, imagine if you had to jump every single Japanese island until you eventually get to the mainland. We would still be at war, probably.
The battle for Okinawa is a good example. The southernmost of the Japanese islands was invaded conventionally, and the bloodshed on both sides was horrific. If you project that out to an invasion of the main island of Japan, it would have been far, far worse. And so, in that sense, the nuclear bombs, the use of the nuclear bombs was highly moral, highly moral. If it were not for a decisive end to World War II, let's imagine someone said, let's have a ceasefire, with the Nazis or with Tojo, or, whatever the ceasefire was. What would we have? We'd still have the culture of Imperial Japan, aggressive, kamikaze Imperial Japan. We'd still have the culture of Nazi Germany, wiping them out decisively, effectively, psychologically smashing them was essential to the progress of civilization and peace. Similarly here, if you don't bring Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran to complete heel, it will just go on. And you're inviting it to just go on. By turning the other cheek, you're sanctioning the violence. You're sanctioning October 7th. You're saying more October 7th, go. Perpetual war, let's go. That's what your turn the other cheek altruism is. Subjects of Britain, that's what it is. And it's based on a very specialized mistreatment of Israel. It's because they're surrounded by Muslim savages, because there's some ancient blood right to the land that Muslims have? What the hell kind of collectivist racist nonsense are you buying into? Israel is what really is a capitalist, colonialist, imperialist state? Is that what you're buying into? Or is it just you hate Jews? Which there's plenty of evidence in Europe, Western Europe today, to believe that there hasn't been much progress in anti-Semitism, frankly. So, or maybe a combination of all of them. But in any case, you're sanctioning evil. You're promoting more violence. You're not bringing an end to the war. such as World War II came to a end with. No, it is the most inhumane. We were talking in the philosophical forum earlier today about the relationship between benevolence and selfishness. There is no such thing as an unselfish benevolence or a benevolence that is not selfish. The two go hand in hand. And similarly here, a proper self-defense, smashing the enemy now. Frankly, it's the best thing you could do. We did for the Japanese. Frankly, it's the best thing we did for the Germans. Now, it was in the interest of the Allies. That's why we were doing it, to bring peace and end the threat. But in the process, a byproduct was a tremendous gift to the Japanese and German people.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I've been getting into investing and like seeing the growth of Japan. And basically, like I think at some point they were like 30% of like a global, I think GDP was just Japan, or stock market. I'm not sure which one it was, but it was like a big boom. And again, that could only come up. And now Germany is pretty much the leader of Europe and has been for since unification, and probably even a bit before that. And again, that came
West
out of
Germany,
this.
they were an amazing, in the context of contemporary Europe, even just West Germany was a dynamic economy in that context.
Yeah, and that was brought up because they gave up on the old ideas of Nazism in one case, and imperialism, or whatever the Japanese sort of like Shintoistic system was. We have a few super chats. So first, thank you, Bonnie, and thank you, Bonnie, again for two super chats. Uh, so yeah, wrapping up, I think this really and just to call them out, I believe Netherlands, Italy, Spain, Finland, Portugal, Slovenia, and Ireland have officially committed to basically arresting Netanyahu if it comes to it. And as of this video, I think only Hungary has committed the other way, that basically Orban has, or maybe the foreign minister of Hungary, have officially invited Netanyahu to come in,
Right.
and also basically saying he would be safe, which one way is inviting him, and one way is if it actually happens. Because if someone like Netanyahu, who has an ICC warrant against him, comes into a country that is supposed to arrest him, and they don't, that will definitely put a lot of doubt into the ICC. Basically, what's the point if you cannot enforce it, which I'm all for.
Well, the ICC's limited jurisdiction, its self-imposed limited jurisdiction, as we just covered a few minutes ago, is part of the reason why it's essentially an unjust kind of procedure. It must issue injustice. It's the International Court of Criminal Injustice. There can be no other way of looking at it, and that's the point. Once you get off of correct principles when it comes to force and rights like that, that's what makes international law such a joke. What, you're going to regulate the use of force, but obviously it's not going to be the Hitlers who you're going to be regulating, because they won't accept your ICC. The only people whose hands are going to be tied are the good guys who have some sense of morality, who are being invaded. Well, I would ask those good guy countries to check your moral premises. The use of force is perfectly moral. It is perfectly moral to kill lots of people sometimes. It's a terrible situation when we have to, but it is the moral, heroic, good thing to do in the face of aggression. If you don't in the face of aggression, then you're sanctioning the aggression. You're saying the aggressive violence is okay. Get away with it. In fact, if you give them a dangle out a carrot like we'll recognize Palestinian statehood, you're absolutely encouraging it. If you you go out of your way to make special efforts to feed the enemy population, you're sending the same signal. No, we live in a time of moral perversity, ladies and gentlemen. The world is confused about right and wrong. And so the world is sanctioning the worst kind of evil you can imagine, and negatively sanctioning the positive. In this context, Netanyahu, for all his, we would do something different. That's true. But for all of his weakness, Netanyahu is comparatively the hero here. The hero here. He should be feted. He should be allowed to speak before Parliament and another joint session of Congress. He should be rewarded, not punished. Otherwise, you're perverse. Otherwise, you're the one sanctioning more October 7th. Full stop.
Well, the United States haven't been ICC signatory also for some time. So, and I think even I'm not sure if Biden specifically came out or just his administration or spokesperson, but they've called it again a travesty. So there is still some basic sort of unified theme when it comes to Democratic Republican view of Israel. And especially now with Republican administration, full-on Republican administration coming in, we might even see much more done about specifically ICC, which I think is something that's a bit bright because it is truly depressing that in Europe, I have to rely on someone like Viktor Orban, pretty much a dictator wannabe, to have a moral confidence to like stand up for someone like Netanyahu. I think the only sort of closest country right now is Czechia. That is, they are not saying that they would protect it, but I think the Prime Minister Petr Fiala has said that this decision was wrong, and also they are very split about it because again, if you are, especially if you are a EU nation, you have some basic respect for the international law, which I think is very it's wrong, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's I think in some cases it stands from a good place. You view it, especially if someone who was recently had arrest warrant about him, someone like Putin, if if you it as like an actual something good coming out of it, you are sort of seeing a split. So I hope, especially Czechia has in the past had pretty good pro-Israeli stance, and has even called out the UN in many times. So I hope more people and more countries will realize there is something fundamentally wrong with the UN and all its bodies. So that's why I think this is an interesting thing that many are conflicted.
Let's get that sanctions bill through Congress, Senator Thune. You said the ICC should be sanctioned. I agree with you. Let us pass an act of Congress to that effect. Yeah. And let's sanction them negatively. Let's describe them as the immoral, corrupt agents of evil that they are. And if Americans negatively morally sanction by law the ICC, we're beginning to see some correct moral approach to this subject. But obviously not a perfect one. But at least it would be the correct direction to be going in, to morally denounce the ICC and tell the ICC it has no jurisdiction, no business, and we don't even like you. We think you're wrong, evil. We will fight you, ICC. The United States of America, by law, officially opposes you, ICC. That is what needs to happen. I don't expect it in Britain. I don't expect it in many European countries, and certainly not the EU, and certainly not the United Nations. But at least the United States will have the backbone, I hope. Senator Thune, it's encouraging that he would say that. Let's get that act of Congress denouncing the evil of the ICC passed. Yes.
Someone is asking, will the ICC bring Mohammed Dave's ashes to the courtroom? So whenever I talk about these arrest warrants, I oftentimes mention maybe just Netanyahu or just Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. But for context, it's important to also say that Mohammed Dave. And the reason why Mohammed Dave has it is that Hamas hasn't confirmed his death. So I guess we go by what Hamas says and not by what Israel says.
And we always accept what Hamas says anyway. I mean, they're the perpetrators of October 7th. They've been caught in numerous lies. So let's just keep accepting what Hamas says. That's the MO of Western media. Yeah.
So that's just sort of like the official story that basically because they cannot confirm, they also put it out against him. All right. I think we've covered this pretty nicely. So thank you, James, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of The Daily Objective and also the reality show extra. So make sure to join us tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Be safe.